Good evening, and welcome to Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's installment provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep for once. So lie back, adjust your volume, take a nice deep breath, and off we go. Before we begin with this evening's reading, I have two announcements. The first is a special shout out of thanks to our two newest Patreon supporters, Megan and the Unintentional Vegan Ninja. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. Your help makes it possible, and it's much appreciated. If you're interested in learning about the exclusive perks available to supporters, including monthly episodes found nowhere else, you'll find a link to our Patreon page in the show description. Secondly, this evening's reading is a little special. It's being done in conjunction with an episode by one of my favorite YouTube artists, the French Whisperer. If you're not familiar with him, you should definitely check out his page. He does amazing stories for sleep and relaxation, and if you enjoy this podcast, I think you'll really enjoy his work. I've added a link to his YouTube page to the show description if you'd like to check him out for yourself. This week he's producing an episode on Genghis Khan, and tonight's reading is done as a compliment to that. This evening we're reading The Travels of Marco Polo, the complete Yule Cordier edition, including the unabridged third edition of Henry Yule's annotated translation of 1903, as revised by Henri Cordier, together with Cordier's later volume of Notes and Addenda from 1920. As a brief side note, you're about to hear the word Tartars mentioned a lot. This is the old European name for the Mongols and the Turkic-speaking peoples they ruled, collectively known as the Golden Horde. Let's begin. Dedication. To the memory of Sir Roderick I. Murchison, KCB, GCSTA, GCSTS, etc., the perfect friend who first brought Henry Yule and John Murray together. He entered into rest October 22nd, 1871. And to that of his much-loved niece, Harriet Isabella Murchison, wife of Kenneth Robert Murchison, D.L., J.P., she entered into rest August 9th, 1902, under whose ever-hospitable roof many of the proof sheets of this edition were read by me. I dedicate these volumes from the old Murchison home in thankful remembrance of all I owe to the abiding affection, sympathy, and example of both. Amy Frances Yule, Taradale, Ross-shire, Scotland, September 11th, 1902. Preface to the third edition. Little did I think some 30 years ago, when I received a copy of the first edition of this grand work, that I should be one day entrusted with the difficult but glorious task of supervising the third edition. When the first edition of the Book of Sir Marco Polo reached Far Cathay, it created quite a stir in the small circle of the learned foreigners who then resided there, and became a starting point for many researches, of which the results have been made use of partly in the second edition and partly in the present. The Archimandrite Palladius and Dr. E. Brett Schneider at Peking Alexander Wiley at Shanghai, friends of mine who have alas passed away, with the exception of the Right Reverend Bishop G. E. Moole of Hangzhou, the only survivor of this little group of hard-working scholars, were the first to explore the Chinese sources of information which were to yield a rich harvest into their hands. When I returned home from China in 1876, I was introduced to Colonel Henry Yule at the India Office by our common friend Dr. Reinhold Rost, and from that time we met frequently and kept up a correspondence which terminated only with the life of the great geographer whose friend I had become. A new edition of the Travels of Friar Odoric of Pordenone, our mutual friend, in which Yule had taken the greatest interest, was dedicated by me to his memory. I knew that Yule contemplated a third edition of his Marco Polo, and all will regret that time was not allowed to him to complete this labor of love, to see it published. If the duty of bringing out the new edition of Marco Polo has fallen on one who considers himself but an unworthy successor of the first illustrious commentator, it is fair to add that the work could not have been entrusted to a more respectful disciple. Many of our tastes were similar. We had the same desire to seek the truth, the same earnest wish to be exact, perhaps the same sense of humor, and what is necessary when writing on Marco Polo, certainly the same love for Venice and its history. I therefore gladly and thankfully accepted Miss Amy Frances Yule's kind proposal to undertake the editorship of the third edition of the Book of Sir Marco Polo, and I wish to express here my gratitude to her for the great honor she has thus done me. Unfortunately for his successor, Sir Henry Yule, evidently trusting to his own good memory, left but few notes. These are contained in an interleaved copy obligingly placed at my disposal by Miss Yule, but I luckily found assistance from various other quarters. The following works have proved of the greatest assistance to me: the articles of General Hotham Schindler in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, and the excellent books of Lord Curzon and of Major P. Molesworth Sykes on Persia, Monsieur Grenard's account of de Troderin's mission to Central Asia, Brett Schneider's and Palladius's remarkable papers on medieval travelers and geography, and above all, the valuable books of the Honorable W. W. Rockhill on Tibet and Rubruk, to which the distinguished diplomatist, traveler, and scholar kindly added a list of notes of the greatest importance to me, for which I offer him my hearty thanks. My thanks are also due to His Highness Prince Roland Bonaparte, who kindly gave me permission to reproduce some of the plates of his Recueil de Documents de l'Époque Mongole. To Monsieur Léopold Delisle, the learned principal librarian of the Bibliothèque Nationale, who gave me the opportunity to study the inventory made after the death of the Doge Marino Faliero. To the Count de Semalet, formerly French chargé d'affaires at Peking, who gave me for reproduction a number of photographs from his valuable personal collection. And last, not least, my old friend, Commander Niccolo Barozzi, who continued to lend me the assistance which he had formerly rendered to Sir Henry Yule at Venice. Since the last edition was published more than 25 years ago, Persia has been more thoroughly studied. New routes have been explored in Central Asia. Karakoram has been fully described, and western and southwestern China have been opened up to our knowledge in many directions. The results of these investigations form the main features of this new edition of Marco Polo. I have suppressed hardly any of Sir Henry Yule's notes, and altered but few, doing so only when the light of recent information has proved him to be in error. But I have supplemented them by what I hope will be found useful new information. Before I take leave of the kind reader, I wish to thank sincerely Mr. John Murray for the courtesy and the care he has displayed while this edition was going through the press. Henri Cordier, Paris, 1st of October, 1902. The Book of Marco Polo. Prologue. Great princes, emperors and kings, dukes and marquises, counts, knight and burgesses, and people of all degrees who desire to get knowledge of the various races of mankind and of the diversities of the sundry regions of the world, take this book and cause it to be read to you, for ye shall find therein all kinds of wonderful things, and the diverse histories of the great Hermenia and of Persia, and of the land of the Tartars and of India, and of many another country of which our book doth speak, particularly and in regular succession, according to the description of Messer Marco Polo, a wise and noble citizen of Venice, as he saw them with his own eyes. Some things indeed there be therein which he beheld not, but these he heard from men of credit and veracity, and we shall set down things seen as seen, and things heard as heard only, so that no jot of falsehood may mar the truth of our book, and that all who shall read it or hear it read may put full faith in the truth of all its contents. For let me tell you that since our Lord God did mold with his hands our first father Adam, even until this day, never hath there been Christian or pagan or Tartar or Indian, or any man of any nation, who in his own person hath had so much knowledge and experience of the diverse parts of the world and its wonders as hath had this Messer Marco. And for that reason he bethought himself that it would be a very great pity did he not cause to be put in writing all the great marvels that he had seen, or on sure information heard of, so that other people who had not these advantages might, by his book, get such knowledge. And I may tell you that in acquiring this knowledge, he spent in those various parts of the world good 26 years. Now, being thereafter an inmate of the prison at Genoa, he caused Messer Rusticiano of Pisa, who was in the said prison likewise, to reduce the whole to writing, and this befell in the year 1298 from the birth of Jesus. Chapter 1. How the two brothers Polo set forth from Constantinople to traverse the world. It came to pass in the year of Christ 1260, when Baldwin was reigning at Constantinople, that Messer Nicholas Polo, the father of my Lord Mark, and Messer Maffeo Polo, the brother of Messer Nicholas, were at the said city of Constantinople, whither they had gone from Venice with their merchants' wares. Now these two brethren, men singularly noble, wise, and provident, took counsel together to cross the greater sea on a venture of trade. So they laid in a store of jewels and set forth from Constantinople, crossing the sea to Soldaya. Chapter 2. How the two brothers went on beyond Soldaya. Having stayed a while at Soldaya, they considered the matter and thought it well to extend their journey further. So they set forth from Soldaya and traveled till they came to the court of a certain Tartar prince, Marco Khan by name, whose residences were at Sara and at Bulgara, and who was esteemed one of the most liberal and courteous princes that ever was among the Tartars. This Barca was delighted at the arrival of the two brothers and treated them with great honor. So they presented to him the whole of the jewels that they had brought with them. The prince was highly pleased with these and accepted the offering most graciously, causing the brothers to receive at least twice its value. After they had spent a 12-month at the court of this prince, there broke out a great war between Barca and Allahu, the lord of the Tartars of the Levant, and great hosts were mustered on either side. But in the end, Barca, the lord of the Tartars of the Ponent, was defeated, though on both sides there was great slaughter. And by reason of this war, no one could travel without peril of being taken. Thus it was at least on the road by which the brothers had come, though there was no obstacle to their traveling forward. So the brothers, finding they could not retrace their steps, determined to go forward. Quitting Bulgara, therefore, they proceeded to a city called Ukaka, which was at the extremity of the kingdom of the lord of the Ponent, and thence departing again, and passing the great river Tigris, they traveled across a desert which extended for 17 days' journey, and wherein they found neither town nor village, falling in only with the tents of Tartars occupied with their cattle at pasture. Editor's Note 1. Barca Khan, third son of Juji, the firstborn of Genghis, ruled the Ulus of Juji and Empire of Kipchak in southern Russia from 1257 to 1265. Chapter 3. How the two brothers, after crossing a desert, came to the city of Bokhara and fell in with certain envoys there. After they had passed the desert, they arrived at a very great and noble city called Bokhara, the territory of which belonged to a king whose name was Barak, and is also called Bokhara. The city is the best in all Persia. And when they had got thither, they found they could neither proceed further forward nor yet turn back again. Wherefore they abode in that city of Bokhara for 3 years. And whilst they were sojourning in that city, there came from Alau, lord of the Levant, envoys on their way to the court of the great Khan, the lord of all the Tartars in the world. And when the envoys beheld the two brothers, they were amazed, for they had never before seen Latins in that part of the world. And they said to the brothers, Gentlemen, if ye will take our counsel, you will find great honor and profit shall come thereof. So they replied that they would be right glad to learn how. In truth, said the envoys, the great Khan hath never seen any Latins, and he hath a great desire to do so. Wherefore, if ye will keep us company to his court, ye may depend upon it that he will be right glad to see you, and will treat you with great honor and liberality. Whilst in our company ye shall travel with perfect security, and need fear to be molested by nobody. Chapter 4. How the two brothers took the envoy's counsel. So, when the two brothers had made their arrangements, they set out on their travels in company with the envoys, and journeyed for a whole year, going northward and northeastward, before they reached the court of that prince. And on their journey they saw many marvels of diverse and sundry kinds. But of these we shall say nothing at present, because Messer Mark, who has likewise seen them all, will give you a full account of them in the book which follows. Chapter 5. How the two brothers arrived at the court of the great Khan. When the two brothers got to the great Khan, he received them with great honor and hospitality, and showed much pleasure at their visit, asking them a great number of questions. First, he asked about the emperors, how they maintained their dignity and administered justice in their dominions, and how they went forth to battle, and so forth. And then he asked the like questions about the kings and princes and other potentates. Chapter 6. How the great Khan asked all about the manners of the Christians. And then the great Khan inquired about the Pope and the Church, and about all that is done at Rome, and all the customs of the Latins. And the two brothers told him the truth in all its particulars, with order and good sense, like sensible men as they were. And this they were able to do, as they knew the Tartar language well. Chapter 7. How the great Khan sent the two brothers as his envoys to the Pope. When that prince, whose name was Kublai Khan, lord of the Tartars all over the earth, and of all the kingdoms and provinces and territories of that vast quarter of the world, had heard all that the brothers had to tell him about the ways of the Latins, he was greatly pleased, and he took it into his head that he would send them on an embassy to the Pope. So he urgently desired them to undertake this mission along with one of his barons. And they replied that they would gladly execute all his commands as those of their sovereign lord. Then the prince sent to summon to his presence one of his barons whose name was Kogatal, and desired him to get ready, for it was proposed to send him to the Pope along with the two brothers. The baron replied that he would execute the Lord's commands to the best of his ability. After this, the prince caused letters from himself to the Pope to be indited in the Tartar tongue, and committed them to the two brothers and to that baron of his own, and charged them with what he wished them to say to the Pope. Now the contents of the letter were to this purport. He begged that the Pope would send as many as 100 persons of our Christian faith, intelligent men, acquainted with the 7 arts, rhetoric, logic, grammar, arithmetic, astronomy, music, and geometry, well qualified to enter into controversy, and able clearly to prove by force of argument to idolaters and other kinds of folk that the law of Christ was best, and that all other religions were false and naught, and that if they would prove this, he and all under him would become Christians and the Church's liegemen. Finally, he charged his envoys to bring back to him some oil of the lamp which burns on the sepulchre of our Lord at Jerusalem. Chapter 8. How the great Khan gave them a tablet of gold bearing his orders in their behalf. When the prince had charged them with all his commission, he caused to be given them a tablet of gold, on which was inscribed that the 3 ambassadors should be supplied with everything needful in all the countries through which they should pass, with horses, with escorts, and in short, with whatever they should require. And when they had made all needful preparations, the 3 ambassadors took their leave of the emperor and set out. When they had traveled I know not how many days, the Tartar baron fell sick, so that he could not ride, and being very ill and unable to proceed further, he halted at a certain city. So the 2 brothers judged it best that they should leave him behind and proceed to carry out their commission, and as he was well content that they should do so, they continued their journey. And I can assure you that whithersoever they went, they were honorably provided with whatever they stood in need of or chose to command, and this was owing to that tablet of authority from the Lord which they carried with them. So they traveled on and on until they arrived at Laos in Armenia, a journey which occupied them, I assure you, for 3 years. It took them so long because they could not always proceed, being stopped sometimes by snow, or by heavy rains falling, or by great torrents which they found in an impassable state. Chapter 9. How the 2 brothers came to the city of Acre. They departed from Laos and came to Acre, arriving there in the month of April, in the year of Christ 1269, and then they learned that the Pope was dead. And when they found that the Pope was dead, they went to a certain wise churchman who was legate for the whole kingdom of Egypt, and a man of great authority, by name Theobald of Piacenza, and told him of the mission on which they were come. When the legate heard their story, he was greatly surprised, and deemed the thing to be of great honor and advantage for the whole of Christendom. So his answer to the 2 ambassador brothers was this: Gentlemen, ye see that the Pope is dead, wherefore ye must needs have patience until a new Pope be made, and then shall ye be able to execute your charge. Seeing well enough that what the legate said was just, they observed, But while the Pope is a-making, we may as well go to Venice and visit our households. So they departed from Acre and went to Negropont, and from Negropont they continued their voyage to Venice. On their arrival there, Messer Nicholas found that his wife was dead, and that she had left behind her a son of 15 years of age, whose name was Marco. And 'tis of him that this book tells. Chapter 10. How the two brothers again departed from Venice. When the two brothers had tarried as long as I have told you, and saw that never a pope was made, they said that their return to the great Khan must be put off no longer. So they set out from Venice, taking Marco along with them, and went straight back to Acre, where they found the legate of whom we have spoken. They had a good deal of discourse with him concerning the matter, and asked his permission to go to Jerusalem to get some oil from the lamp on the sepulchre to carry with them to the great Khan, as he had enjoined. The legate giving them leave, they went from Acre to Jerusalem, and got some of the oil, and then returned to Acre, and went to the legate and said to him, "As we see no sign of a pope's being made, we desire to return to the great Khan, for we have already tarried long, and there has been more than enough delay." To which the legate replied, "Since 'tis your wish to go back, I am well content." Wherefore he caused letters to be written for delivery to the great Khan, bearing testimony that the two brothers had come in all good faith to accomplish his charge, but that as there was no pope, they had been unable to do so. Chapter 11. How the two brothers set out. When the two brothers had received the legate's letters, they set forth from Acre to return to the Grand Khan, and got as far as Laias. But shortly after their arrival there, they had news that the legate aforesaid was chosen pope, taking the name of Pope Gregory of Piacenza, news which the two brothers were very glad indeed to hear. And presently there reached them at Laias a message from the legate, now the pope, desiring them on the part of the apostolic see not to proceed further on their journey, but to return to him incontinently. And what shall I tell you? The king of Hermenia caused a galley to be got ready for the two ambassador brothers, and dispatched them to the pope at Acre. Chapter 12. How the two brothers presented themselves before the new pope. And when they had been thus honorably conducted to Acre, they proceeded to the presence of the pope, and paid their respects to him with humble reverence. He received them with great honor and satisfaction, and gave them his blessing. He then appointed 2 friars of the order of preachers to accompany them to the great Khan, and to do whatever might be required of them. These were unquestionably as learned churchmen as were to be found in the province at that day, one being called Friar Nicholas of Vicenza, and the other Friar William of Tripoli. He delivered to them also proper credentials, and letters in reply to the great Khan's messages, and gave them authority to ordain priests and bishops, and to bestow every kind of absolution as if given by himself in proper person, sending by them also many fine vessels of crystal as presents to the great Khan. So when they had got all that was needful, they took leave of the Pope, receiving his benediction, and the 4 set out together from Acre, and went to Laias, accompanied always by Messer Nicholas's son Marco. Now about the time that they reached Laias, Bendoquadar, the Soldan of Babylon, invaded Hermenia with a great host of Saracens, and ravaged the country, so that our envoys ran a great peril of being taken or slain. And when the preaching friars saw this, they were greatly frightened, and said that go they never would. So they made over to Messrs. Nicholas and Messer Maffeo all their credentials and documents, and took their leave, departing in company with the master of the temple. Chapter 13. How Messer Niccolo and Messer Maffeo Polo, accompanied by Marco, traveled to the court of the great Khan. So the two brothers and Marco along with them proceeded on their way, and journeying on summer and winter, came at length to the great Khan, who was then at a certain rich and great city called Kaiminfu. As to what they met with on the road, whether in going or coming, we shall give no particulars at present, because we are going to tell you all those details in regular order in the after part of this book. Their journey back to the Khan occupied a good 3 years and a half, owing to the bad weather and severe cold they had encountered. And let me tell you in good sooth that when the great Khan heard that Messrs. Niccolo and Maffeo Polo were on their way back, he sent people a journey of full 40 days to meet them. And on this journey, as on their former one, they were honorably entertained upon the road, and supplied with all that they required. Chapter 14. How Messer Niccolo and Messer Maffeo Polo and Marco presented themselves before the great Khan. And what shall I tell you? When the two brothers and Marco had arrived at that great city, they went to the imperial palace, and there they found the sovereign attended by a great company of barons. So they bent the knee before him, and paid their respects to him with all possible reverence, prostrating themselves on the ground. Then the Lord bade them stand up, and treated them with great honor, showing great pleasure at their coming, and asked many questions as to their welfare and how they had sped. They replied that they had in verity sped well, seeing that they found the Khan well and safe. Then they presented the credentials and letters which they had received from the Pope, which pleased him right well. And after that they produced the oil from the sepulchre, and at that also he was very glad, for he set great store thereby. And next, spying Marco, who was then a young gallant, he asked who was that in their company. "Sire," said his father Messer Niccolo, "'tis my son and your liegeman." "Welcome is he too," quoth the emperor. "And why should I make a long story? There was great rejoicing at the court because of their arrival, and they met with attention and honor from everybody. So there they abode at the court with the other barons. Chapter 15. How the emperor sent Marco on an embassy of his own. Now it came to pass that Marco, the son of Messer Niccolo, sped wondrously in learning the customs of the Tartars, as well as their language, their manner of writing, and their practice of war. In fact, he came in brief space to know several languages, and 4 sundry written characters, and he was discreet and prudent in every way, insomuch that the emperor held him in great esteem. And so when he discerned Marco to have so much sense, and to conduct himself so well and beseemingly, he sent him on an embassage of his to a country which was a good 6 months' journey distant. The young gallant executed his commission well and with discretion. Now he had taken note on several occasions that when the prince's ambassadors returned from different parts of the world, they were able to tell him about nothing except the business on which they had gone, and that the prince, in consequence, held them for no better than fools and dolts, and would say, "I had far liever hearken about the strange things and the manners of the different countries you have seen than merely be told of the business you went upon." For he took great delight in hearing of the affairs of strange countries. Marco, therefore, as he went and returned, took great pains to learn about all kinds of different matters in the countries which he visited, in order to be able to tell about them to the great Khan. Chapter 16. How Marco returned from the mission whereon he had been sent. When Marco returned from his embassage, he presented himself before the emperor, and after making his report of the business with which he was charged and its successful accomplishment, he went on to give an account in a pleasant and intelligent manner of all the novelties and strange things that he had seen and heard, insomuch that the emperor and all such as heard his story were surprised, and said, "If this young man live, he will assuredly come to be a person of great worth and ability." And so from that time forward he was always entitled Messer Marco Polo, and thus we shall style him henceforth in this book of ours, as is but right. Thereafter Messer Marco abode in the Khan's employment some 17 years, continually going and coming hither and thither on the missions that were entrusted to him by the Lord, and sometimes with the permission and authority of the great Khan on his own private affairs. And as he knew all the sovereign's ways, like a sensible man, he always took much pains to gather knowledge of anything that would be likely to interest him, and then on his return to court he would relate everything in regular order, and thus the emperor came to hold him in great love and favor. And for this reason also he would employ him the oftener on the most weighty and most distant of his missions. These Messer Marco ever carried out with discretion and success, God be thanked. So the emperor became ever more partial to him, and treated him with the greater distinction, and kept him so close to his person that some of the barons waxed very envious thereat. And thus it came about that Messer Marco Polo had knowledge of, or had actually visited, a greater number of the different countries of the world than any other man, the more that he was always giving his mind to get knowledge, and to spy out and inquire into everything in order to have matter to relate to the Lord. Chapter 17. How Messer Niccolo, Messer Maffeo, and Messer Marco asked leave of the great Khan to go their way. When the two brothers and Marco had abode with the Lord all that time that you have been told, having meanwhile acquired great wealth in jewels and gold, they began among themselves to have thoughts about returning to their own country, and indeed it was time. For, to say nothing of the length and infinite perils of the way, when they considered the Khan's great age, they doubted whether, in the event of his death before their departure, they would ever be able to get home. They applied to him several times for leave to go, presenting their request with great respect, but he had such a partiality for them, and liked so much to have them about him, that nothing on earth would persuade him to let them go. Now it came to pass in those days that the Queen Bolgana, wife of Argon, lord of the Levant, departed this life, and in her will she had desired that no lady should take her place, or succeed her as Argon's wife, except one of her own family, which existed in Cathay. Argon therefore dispatched 3 of his barons, by name respectively Ulate, Apuska, and Koja, as ambassadors to the great Khan, attended by a very gallant company, in order to bring back as his bride a lady of the family of Queen Bolgana, his late wife. When these 3 barons had reached the court of the great Khan, they delivered their message, explaining wherefore they were come. The Khan received them with all honor and hospitality, and then sent for a lady whose name was Kokachin, who was of the family of the deceased Queen Bolgana. She was a maiden of 17, a very beautiful and charming person, and on her arrival at court, she was presented to the 3 barons as the lady chosen in compliance with their demand. They declared that the lady pleased them well. Meanwhile, Messer Marco chanced to return from India, whither he had gone as the Lord's ambassador, and made his reports of all the different things that he had seen in his travels, and of the sundry seas over which he had voyaged. And the 3 barons, having seen that Messer Niccolo, Messer Maffeo, and Messer Marco were not only Latins, but men of marvelous good sense withal, took thought among themselves to get the 3 to travel with them, their intention being to return to their country by sea, on account of the great fatigue of that long land journey for a lady. And the ambassadors were the more desirous to have their company, as being aware that those 3 had great knowledge and experience of the Indian Sea, and the countries by which they would have to pass, and especially Messer Marco. So they went to the great Khan, and begged as a favor that he would send the 3 Latins with them, as it was their desire to return home by sea. The Lord, having that great regard that I have mentioned for those 3 Latins, was very loath to do so, and his countenance showed great dissatisfaction. But at last he did give them permission to depart, enjoining them to accompany the 3 barons and the lady. Chapter 18. How the 2 brothers and Messer Marco took leave of the great Khan, and returned to their own country. And when the prince saw that the 2 brothers and Messer Marco were ready to set forth, he called them all 3 to his presence, and gave them 2 golden tablets of authority, which should secure them liberty of passage through all his dominions, and by means of which, whithersoever they should go, all necessaries would be provided for them, and for all their company, and whatever they might choose to order. He charged them also with messages to the King of France, the King of England, the King of Spain, and the other kings of Christendom. He then caused 13 ships to be equipped, each of which had 4 masts and often spread 12 sails. And I could easily give you all particulars about these, but as it would be so long an affair, I will not enter upon this now, but hereafter, when time and place are suitable. Among the said ships were at least 4 or 5 that carried crews of 250 or 260 men. And when the ships had been equipped, the 3 barons and the lady and the 2 brothers and Messer Marco took leave of the great Khan, and went on board their ships with a great company of people, and with all necessaries provided for 2 years by the emperor. They put forth to sea, and after sailing for some 3 months, they arrived at a certain island towards the south, which is called Java, and in which there are many wonderful things which we shall tell you about by and by. Quitting this island, they continued to navigate the Sea of India for 18 months more before they arrived whither they were bound, meeting on their way also many marvels, of which we shall tell hereafter. And when they got thither, they found that Argan was dead, so the lady was delivered to Ghassan his son. But I should have told you that it is a fact that when they embarked, they were in number some 600 persons without counting the mariners, but nearly all died by the way, so that only 8 survived. The sovereignty when they arrived was held by Kiakatu, so they commended the lady to him and executed all their commission. And when the 2 brothers and Messer Marco had executed their charge in full, and done all that the great Khan had enjoined on them in regard to the lady, they took their leave and set out upon their journey. And before their departure, Kiakatu gave them 4 golden tablets of authority, 2 of which bore gerfalcons, 1 bore lions, whilst the 4th was plain, and having on them inscriptions which directed that the 3 ambassadors should receive honor and service all through the land as if rendered to the prince in person, and that horses and all provisions and everything necessary should be supplied to them. And so they found in fact, for throughout the country they received ample and excellent supplies of everything needful, and many a time indeed, as I may tell you, they were furnished with 200 horsemen, more or less, to escort them on their way in safety. And this was all the more needful because Kiakatu was not the legitimate lord, and therefore the people had less scruple to do mischief than if they had had a lawful prince. Another thing too must be mentioned, which does credit to those 3 ambassadors, and shows for what great personages they were held. The great Khan regarded them with such trust and affection that he had confided to their charge the Queen Kokachin, as well as the daughter of the King of Manzi, to conduct to Argan the lord of all the Levant. And those 2 great ladies who were thus entrusted to them, they watched over and guarded as if they had been daughters of their own, until they had transferred them to the hands of their lord, whilst the ladies, young and fair as they were, looked on each of those 3 as a father and obeyed them accordingly. Indeed, both Ghassan, who is now the reigning prince, and the Queen Kokachin, his wife, have such a regard for the envoys that there is nothing they would not do for them. And when the 3 ambassadors took leave of that lady to return to their own country, she wept for sorrow at the parting. What more shall I say? Having left Kiakatu, they travelled day by day till they came to Trebizond, and thence to Constantinople, from Constantinople to Negropont, and from Negropont to Venice. And this was in the year 1295 of Christ's incarnation. And now that I have rehearsed all the prologue as you have heard, we shall begin the book of the description of the diverse things that Messer Marco met with in his travels. The Travels of Marco Polo, Book First, account of regions visited or heard of on the journey from the Lesser Armenia to the court of the Great Khan at Chandu. Chapter 1. Here the book begins. There are two Armenias, the greater and the less. The Lesser Armenia is governed by a certain king, who maintains a just rule in his dominions, but is himself subject to the Tartar. The country contains numerous towns and villages, and has everything in plenty. Moreover, it is a great country for sport in the chase of all manner of beasts and birds. It is, however, by no means a healthy region, but grievously the reverse. In days of old, the nobles there were valiant men, and did doughty deeds of arms. But nowadays they are poor creatures, and good at naught, unless it be at boozing. They are great at that. Howbeit, they have a city upon the sea, which is called Laias, at which there is a great trade. For you must know that all the spicery and the cloths of silk and gold and the other valuable wares that come from the interior are brought to that city. And the merchants of Venice and of Genoa and other countries come thither to sell their goods and to buy what they lack. And whatsoever persons would travel to the interior of the East, merchants or others, they take their way by this city of Laias. Having now told you about the Lesser Armenia, we shall next tell you about Turkomania. Chapter 2. Concerning the province of Turkomania. In Turkomania, there are three classes of people. First, there are the Turkomans. These are worshippers of Muhammad, a rude people with an uncouth language of their own. They dwell among mountains and downs where they find good pasture, for their occupation is cattle keeping. Excellent horses, known as Turkwans, are reared in their country, and also very valuable mules. The other two classes are the Armenians and the Greeks, who live mixed with the former in the towns and villages, occupying themselves with trade and handicrafts. They weave the finest and handsomest carpets in the world, and also a great quantity of fine and rich silks of cramoisy and other colors, and plenty of other stuffs. Their chief cities are Konya, Savast, where the glorious Messer Saint Blaise suffered martyrdom, and Khazaria, besides many other towns and bishop sees, of which we shall not speak at present, for it would be too long a matter. These people are subject to the Tartar of the Levant as their suzerain. We will now leave this province and speak of the Greater Armenia. Chapter 3. description of the Greater Armenia. This is a great country. It begins at a city called Arzinga, at which they weave the best buckrams in the world. It possesses also the best baths from natural springs that are anywhere to be found. The people of the country are Armenians and are subject to the Tartar. There are many towns and villages in the country, but the noblest of their cities is Arzinga, which is the see of an archbishop, and then Arzaran and Arzizi. The country is indeed a passing great one, and in the summer it is frequented by the whole host of the Tartars of the Levant, because it then furnishes them with such excellent pasture for their cattle. But in winter the cold is past all bounds, so in that season they quit this country and go to a warmer region where they find other good pastures. At a castle called Piperth that you pass in going from Trebizond to Doris, there is a very good silver mine. And you must know that it is in this country of Armenia that the Ark of Noah exists on the top of a certain great mountain, on the summit of which snow is so constant that no one can ascend, for the snow never melts and is constantly added to by new falls. Below, however, the snow does melt and runs down, producing such rich and abundant herbage that in summer cattle are sent to pasture from a long way round about, and it never fails them. The melting snow also causes a great amount of mud on the mountain. The country is bounded on the south by a kingdom called Mosul, the people of which are Jacobite and Nestorian Christians, of whom I shall have more to tell you presently. On the north, it is bounded by the land of the Georgians, of whom also I shall speak. On the confines towards Georgiania, there is a fountain from which oil springs in great abundance, insomuch that 100 shiploads might be taken from it at one time. The oil is not good to use with food, but 'tis good to burn, and is also used to anoint camels that have the mange. People come from vast distances to fetch it, for in all the countries round about they have no other oil. Now, having done with Great Armenia, we will tell you of Georgiania. Chapter 4. Of Georgiania and the kings thereof. In Georgiania there is a king called David Melech, which is as much as to say David King. He is subject to the Tartar. In old times all the kings were born with the figure of an eagle upon the right shoulder. The people are very handsome, capital archers, and the most valiant soldiers. They are Christians of the Greek rite, and have a fashion of wearing their hair cropped like churchmen. This is the country beyond which Alexander could not pass when he wished to penetrate to the region of the Ponent, because that the defile was so narrow and perilous, the sea lying on the one hand, and on the other lofty mountains impassable to horsemen. The strait extends like this for 4 leagues, and a handful of people might hold it against all the world. Alexander caused a very strong tower to be built there, to prevent the people beyond from passing to attack him, and this got the name of the Iron Gate. This is the place that the book of Alexander speaks of, when it tells us how he shut up the Tartars between 2 mountains. Not that they were really Tartars, however, for there were no Tartars in those days, but they consisted of a race of people called Comanians and many besides. In this province, all the forests are of boxwood. There are numerous towns and villages, and silk is produced in great abundance. They also weave cloth of gold and all kinds of very fine silk stuffs. The country produces the best goshawks in all the world, which are called avigi. It has indeed no lack of anything, and the people live by trade and handicrafts. 'Tis a very mountainous region, and full of straight defiles and of fortresses, insomuch that the Tartars have never been able to subdue it out and out. There is in this country a certain convent of nuns called St. Leonard's, about which I have to tell you a very wonderful circumstance. Near the church in question, there is a great lake at the foot of a mountain, and in this lake are found no fish, great or small, throughout the year, till Lent come. On the first day of Lent, they find in it the finest fish in the world, and great store too thereof, and these continue to be found till Easter Eve. After that, they are found no more till Lent come round again, and so 'tis every year. 'Tis really a passing great miracle. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from the Travels of Marco Polo. There's quite a bit more to come, and I didn't even bother reading the 430-page introduction, which includes some delights, like a digression concerning the war galleys of the Mediterranean states in the Middle Ages. I honestly can't wait to read that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, you'll find a link to a free ebook version from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect or suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, the best place to catch me is on Twitter at BoringBooksPod. I'd love to hear from you. And once again, let me recommend YouTube's The French Whisperer to you. His episode on Genghis Khan will likely be more factual than this book, but will undoubtedly be relaxing. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Until our next boring book, good night.